The reason that I think I particularly got interested in researching college students' friendships was a class that I took, and one of the other women said something like, I thought as a women's studies major and now a senior, I would have these really strong women friendships, and I don't. And the rest of us, like around the room, were kind of like, me too. We had friends, but not the strong, meaningful friendships, particularly with other women. And we started to wonder, if we didn't have this, did anyone?
Yeah.
We fall down, but we get up.
Welcome back to Hometown Friends, the only podcast that focuses on the friendship stories from the places we call home. I'm your host, Chandler Hoffman, and I'm both a psychologist and a friendship nerd. I just love talking to my friends, reading about friendships, researching friendship, and of course, talking to others about their friendships. The psychological and sociological research is so clear that having social connection makes life better, and that lacking it makes life more challenging. Social health is distinct from mental health and physical health, but interrelated and intertwined. New research on friendship is being done because we're living in a world that is more disconnected than ever. My guest today is one of those researchers, and her work on college friendships and network analysis is fascinating. Dr. Janice McCabe is a Dartmouth professor and a sociologist, and her new book, Making, Keeping, and Losing Friends, is based on her research. Dr. McCabe has written multiple articles on this topic, and after reading her recent article in the New York Times, I reached out to her for this interview. In this episode, we hear how her personal friendship experiences led to this research focus, how college and hometown friendships are distinct and similar, and what makes friendship so special. We covered the 3 different types of network approaches that people tend to use with their friendships, and the concept of a marketplace being applied to making friends. We discuss how friendships are formed, sustained, and how and why we lose friends. I really appreciated talking to Dr. McCabe about her work, but moreover, getting to know another friendship nerd. I hope you enjoyed this interview and learned something about how we make, keep, and lose friends. And please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with others. Janice McCabe, welcome to the Hometown Friends podcast. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for making time for us and my audience.
Great to be here with you.
I have to tell you, this is, I think, a watershed moment for me. As a small creator, someone who has just sort of started this a couple years ago, I've always had the goal to have a researcher pay attention to this project. And so when you answered my email, which I've sent many and have not gotten any answers, but when you did, I was so excited because it just felt like a legitimization of the project in some way. So I'm personally extremely excited to have the conversation with you, to talk about your personal life, but also your research, and to talk about friendships. And I've always said this, I'm kind of a friendship nerd. I just love to talk about friendships. And I see just from talking to you off camera and all the smaller conversations that you may share that a little bit with me.
I do. Yeah, I look forward to digging in here.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Janice. Introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, because, of course, this podcast, a lot of it is about place and about how place affects our friendship and influences our friendship.
Well, I live in Hanover, New Hampshire, and I am a professor at Dartmouth College. I've been here for, I think, almost 15 years, which is the longest I've lived anywhere in my life. I grew up in a really small town, or actually outside a small town of Prospect, Ohio. I grew up on a farm. It's about an hour north of Columbus, between Columbus and Cleveland, and went to a little rural school. throughout. I moved a couple times before that, but that's where I lived from third grade to going to graduating high school.
And what was it like growing up where you grew up and on a farm? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, and my mom's side of the family is a big farming family, and it was a farming community, a very working class community, too. So there were a lot of people who either worked on small family farms or at like Whirlpool and Honda nearby in manufacturing kind of jobs. It made me really appreciate animals and the outdoors. I love to hike. I did not grow up hiking, but I grew up outside a lot. And I ran track and cross country in high school too. And, despite now, I have lots of fond memories of growing up and I enjoyed it, but I was ready to go away when I went to college. I wanted to be in a city. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I ended up at Tulane University in New Orleans, which is very different from rural Ohio in just about every way.
I bet. I bet. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about sort of growing up and the friends that you had growing up in Ohio.
So, in my research, I do network analysis, and I think I've always been a compartmentalizer, as I call it, which is having these multiple groups of friends. And I think some of it was I had. I was good friends with my parents' friends' kids,
Makes sense.
which were other kids that grew up on farms that didn't necessarily go to the same school that I did, but I grew up in 4-H showing I had a horse and I had sheep, and I grew up doing that and had a friend group around that was really different than the friends that I had growing up in school. And I was chatting with you a little bit earlier that I've had the same best friend since sixth grade,
Wow.
which is a hometown friend. And since we graduated high school, we've never even lived in the same place. And,
Wow.
there are times when we've been like closer and a little less close throughout that time, but we've still always been, at least among each other's best friends, too. And we've provided a lot of support for each other. We have some of our kids are the same age now, and she's also a professor, which is really unusual in the community that we grew up in. Too. She didn't grow up on a farm, but she grew up in this rural community too. And so there are many things that connect us.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, yeah, what do you think has allowed you guys to stay close over this long period of time?
I think, we have similar interests. We're both kind of nerdy, too, so we like to talk about ideas. We like the same music, which are things to connect about. We also shared some hard experiences together, both in high school and then in college, too, which, things that are challenging bring people together,
They really do.
too.
Yeah. Would you be willing to share anything more specific about the difficulties or challenges? Certainly don't have to, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, one really hard thing that happened was there were three of us that were best friends, like in late high school and early college, and we all went to college different places. And our third friend, Chris, committed suicide
Oh my goodness.
and died by suicide. And so we found a lot of support, in each other. And through that, she was having a lot of mental health challenges before that too. So it wasn't like there was just this one hard thing
Of course.
that brought us together. And I think, that's not the friendship origin story that I usually tell, because I have another reason that I'm particularly interested in college friendships. But I also think that experience too is part of why I do what I do.
That makes so much sense. That to lose someone close and to have that person tragically, be so likely lonely and isolated and feel like they don't have any other option I think that's a
Yeah.
profound reason to think that how important friendships are and how they affect our lives. So that makes so much sense to me. Maybe I'm biased towards psychology in this regard, but it makes so much sense. So thank you for sharing that one with us. And
Yeah.
of course, so many people have experienced that. My son, particularly, pretty recently in the last couple of years, we had a kid from Berkeley High
Mm.
School. He sadly jumped off the roof in downtown Berkeley, and it was extremely, it was extremely tragic and scary. And my son happened to be in Cuba at the time. He was in a jazz band with this kid, and um, the kid never didn't go to Cuba, and so they all mourned. The whole jazz band was in Cuba, and they all heard this news while they were in Cuba, and they had a whole mourning cycle, and they were distraught. But then you saw how friendships were formed in that moment with people giving support to each other and telling stories, and then they played music, and that was a really healing atmosphere, I think, for everybody. Although certainly challenging and scary and hurtful for everyone. But I just think that story is such an important story to tell and to be honest about, because, of course, friendships make a difference in our lives, and the lack thereof, and the lack of connection, and the lack of feeling like we have people in our corners do the opposite, right? They create unwellness or disease. Um,
Yeah, and friendships have such a lasting impact on us
yeah,
too, in so
yeah,
many ways. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. I really
Mm.
appreciate your willingness here. Well, take us on to Tulane and to what that experience was. Of course, that's a college age for you, and that's probably where some of your research ideas started to come from.
Yeah, that's right. So I said I went to college. I thought I was going to be a women's rights lawyer, and that didn't quite work out. But I ended up keeping the women's studies major that I had intended, and I found sociology while I was there. In many ways, because of the many differences between the hometown where I grew up, the college environment, the like immense wealth too amongst my classmates, as I was struggling to make sense of these many things that I was seeing, and I found sociology. I stumbled into a class, and so I was really curious just about my world in general as an undergraduate. And then the reason that I think I particularly got interested in researching college students' friendships was a class that I took in my last year at Tulane. And as part of the women's studies major, we took a capstone course in women's studies. And there were, I think, 6 of us who were in this class together. And it involved a research project, and our professor had chosen that we would research the women who worked in the casinos in nearby Biloxi, Mississippi. And we didn't know much about it. We were curious. We started meeting outside of class to talk about this project. And one of the other women said something like, I thought as a women's studies major and now a senior, I would have these really strong women friendships, and I don't. And the
Wow.
rest of us, like around the room, were kind of like, me too.
Hmm.
Me too. We had friends,
Mm-hmm.
but not the like strong, meaningful friendships, particularly with other women that we had thought. And we started to wonder, if we didn't have this, did anyone? you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we, being nerdy kids, we kind of researched it on the side of our main project, and eventually told our professor about this side interest that we were developing. And she let us change our project to focus on college women's friendships. It turned from a 1 semester class to a year-long class, and we became friends
That's beautiful.
through doing this project together.
Wow, what a great story of creating sort of meaning and also connection. I wonder
Yeah.
how did that feel to sort of come to that kind of moment?
like I remember when we were at Kathleen's apartment, and most of us were sitting on the floor because it was a college apartment, right? um, and it was just this moment of like, wow, like the personal is political, like these individual experiences that we were having were things that none of us had talked about openly until that moment.
Right.
And right, it took one person being vulnerable, and it was a really vulnerable thing to say in that moment, and she didn't know how we were going to respond. And it changed all of our like last years of college, and I'm still close friends with one of those women and still connected with several of them. Yeah.
What a great experience, and something that I think is emblematic of how we make friends, right? To your point, vulnerability and taking a risk and being personally open to telling a story, and also, of course, this whole sort of vulnerability about saying, I actually don't really feel like I'm close to people. Like there's something that's a difficult thing to say sometimes because, well, we tend to want to be okay or like we've got it all figured out. I think especially in these times with comparison being so easy to do, it's hard to be vulnerable. That's like the work that actually it takes to become and maintain friendships. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I very much agree. And it doesn't always work out that
Mm-hmm.
other people say me too,
True.
right? Sometimes we say it, we're vulnerable, and then we just kind of have to sit in that discomfort. But we should try again
Yes. Well,
too.
that's the true risk, isn't it? Right. That's the true vulnerability. It actually could work the other way. Okay. Well, take us beyond that. Now you have your research focus and something that you're passionate about. Help us understand sort of the way in which you progressed in that regard.
Friendship was one of many things I was interested in throughout a lot of graduate school, and I was interested in higher education too, and how students, I was thinking about it at the time, as how students create community on college campuses, and the role of clubs and organizations and like living learning communities and structural things like that, and creating a sense of community particularly for students who are marginalized in some ways, like Black students on that predominantly white campus. And around the time I was starting to work on my dissertation, we had a new professor who came to the department. Stanley Wasserman is his name. And he is a network researcher. I could find it in this bookshelf behind me. He wrote like the book about network analysis at the time. And I was curious and thinking about, I didn't know too much about network analysis. And I asked him if I could sit in on this class, if I could audit this class that he was teaching at the time. And he told me no, that I was quite surprised about that. He said, I could take the class, but I had to actually like take it, get a grade, enroll in it. I couldn't just sit in and absorb some of it. So it was either like an all or nothing thing. And I talked to my dissertation advisor, and she advised me against taking this class. She was like, I think you just need to get the dissertation done and, keep moving forward. And
Be efficient.
I decided, I decided not to take her advice, and that I was going to take this class.
Wow.
And, thankfully she supported me in that decision to learn network analysis. And now that's really how I think about friendship too. I love combining the stories that people tell through interviews with the mathematics of network analysis, and understanding both kind of the structure and the meaning of friendships.
That's great. Well, let's get in that. So that must have sort of launched you into this particular area of research because, of course, I've read your book, which is Friendships, like keeping and maintaining and losing friendships, and then specifically to college students and college campuses and how college campuses can actually foster these friendships. Tell us a little bit about your research. I guess there was you also did some research previously in another book. So tell us a little bit about your professional career and what you've been focusing on.
Yeah, so I have two books, as you mentioned, on college students' friendship networks. The first one, I was focused on, well, I developed this network typology that I talked a little bit about before with what I call tight knitters, compartmentalizers, and samplers. So, this idea that what I found is that people are often doing this social comparison to tight knitters is kind of like an ideal type people have. It's what we see in a lot of TV shows, movies. You know, if you think about like Friends is the first example that comes to mind, or I've been recently rewatching Stranger Things with my youngest son, and at least at the beginning, the friend group that they have is like one tight knit group too, and we see that a lot. Um, and so I find some people do have that one tight knit group, which provides a lot of social support for people. And then the other two groups are what I call compartmentalizers, which are people who have 2 to 4, sometimes 5 groups of friends. I mentioned I'm a compartmentalizer. Um, Most of the people that I've found across settings are compartmentalizers too. And in college, it's often like friends from home, friends from campus, our students, if they have 2 groups, or sometimes friends from my major, friends from my sorority, friends from my dorm.
Got it.
And then the third group are what I call samplers. They have as many friends, but visually it looks like a daisy flower, that they have mostly one-on-one friendships rather than these groups of friends.
Interesting. Help us understand why networks are so important, and also help us understand how how does personal psychology feed into that, if you have any ideas about it.
I've thought a lot about how much personality
Mm-hmm.
comes into play. And I think these network types, my research is still ongoing. So I'm still like looking at and trying to disentangle these issues. But I think it's part like personality. I think it's part prior experiences that people have, because coming into college, for example, I interviewed some people that had gone to the same school their whole lives, so they don't have practice making friends. And there were other people that either moved a lot or went to a lot of summer camps, or, you know, had a lot of times where they were making new friends along the way. And so it felt more natural, but really it was just that practice that's part of it.
What do you think about how personality or exposure matters to people's networks and how they learn to have these different kinds of networks in general?
What I found was that so I interviewed some people that were more introverted and some that were more extroverted. I didn't have them take a specific test, but I used both my own ratings of them, and I had research assistants looking back over their talks, and it was over their interviews. And it wasn't that just kind of like one of those types or a certain dimension necessarily shaped their network type. I found, for example, some of the samplers were social butterflies and were very extroverted, and other samplers were much more introverted and quiet, and they liked those one-on-one friendships for that reason rather than being part of a group. Um, and so it was part that part like practice that people had in making friends, people that had gone to the same school for, you know, from kindergarten through 12th grade, and others that had a lot of practice making friends, going to lots of summer camps or moving around a lot. And so they were better able to both make friends and different groups of friends along the way. And as I was interviewing them multiple times, some people, compartmentalizers were most likely to stay compartmentalizers, whereas some of them changed, but most of them stayed the same. Whereas the samplers and the tight knitters actually changed more often over time into a different type. And I thought about some of it as just that setting wasn't necessarily a good fit for them too. And, you know, as they talked about, friendship was easier when they were in this different setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. They would get more exposure the longer they live to sort of more maybe choose a different kind of network approach to making friends. I'm curious about sort of this whole making friends and propinquity and homophily and your research around that, because that's the first chapter in your recent book.
So I find the two main drivers in shaping friendship are homophily and propinquity, as you brought up. So homophily are the similarities that we have, and it can be both identity-based homophily or interest-based homophily. And we all have multiple identities and multiple interests. So, often we're connecting with someone first based on a similarity that we see. Either we're both in a club where we share the same interest, like I know you're into mountain biking, so doing that can be something that you can see right away, or it can be for students of color on predominantly white campuses. Sometimes being the only Black student in this class together is something that they connect with initially. But then they may find other interests or other identities that we share in common the more we talk to each other and get to know each other. And propinquity is one way that we can easily get to know each other over time. So it relates to proximity and to encountering the same people over and over again. It's the reason other people's research shows that we're more likely to be friends with people whose apartment door faces ours or who we share a stairwell with, because we're encountering each other more often, and there are more opportunities for these small conversations where we get to know each other too. And that happens on college campuses when we live in the same dorm.
Exactly. And of course, that's one of the things I'd love to explore with you is these comparing and contrasting hometown friends with college friends and how those two things are extremely similar. Because if you live on the same floor of the dorm with people, you're going to likely have friendships there. And of course, if you go to the same high school and maybe in Berkeley, you might belong to the same what we call small schools, and your friendships are going to be there because you see them every day in classes and you have propinquity with them. And then of course sometimes even this homophily might apply if, at least in Berkeley, you have the same interests, or the same identity, racial and or cultural or otherwise. Maybe mountain biking would be an identity as well, where people are connecting over the things that are similar about themselves. So that's how we make friends, is by having these two areas of connection.
Yeah, that's right. And over time, we, get to know each other better, get deeper in
Mm,
those friendships and those relationships too. And then later, propinquity changes for most of us in,
right,
in our lives. Either, we move or other people move. And then what I found is that sometimes a friendship that people thought was really meaningful was actually just something that was easy,
right,
because propinquity propelled people together. And so then when that's no longer operating, either because you're not both in the same hometown together, you're
right.
not both in college, people are making decisions about keeping friends or losing friends, the second and third chapter in my book, too, about who they want to stay connected to, um, which relationships are meaningful, which ones fade away, which ones might break up along the way too.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say that propinquity propels us to making friends, but homophily would allow us to keep them over time? Or are there other things involved with that?
I mean, I think they both propinquity and homophily are important for making friends as well as keeping friends, although they
Yeah.
operate a little bit differently because we need to encounter someone in order to
Yes.
make friends, and then encountering the same person over time, also brings us from just an acquaintance to a closer friend too, because again, other people's research looks at how spending a lot of time together, not just physically in the same based, but you need to actually engage in conversation or getting to know each other in different ways matters. And so propinquity does both of those things. It brings people together initially, and then it brings you together repeatedly too.
Right. And let's talk a little bit more about the marketplace aspect of your research, because, of course, your New York Times article really got my attention, and had never really heard of this aspect of how we make friends as a marketplace. And there are buyers and sellers, and there are different times for it. Can you talk a little bit about your research there?
Yeah, so even though marketplace is a term from economics, here it's really a sociological term, looking at structure, thinking about place and time as both being important in shaping what is a strong marketplace or a weaker marketplace. So when more people are there as buyers and sellers, as you put it can make it sound kind of crass. And I'm really interested in meaningful friendship. So it's not to say that people are being, kind of flip with, thinking
Or
about.
strategic in some way. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can be strategic in seeking out a marketplace and still want really meaningful, deep friendships from it too. But there are probably times in all of our lives where making friends and keeping friends seemed really easy, and other times it was challenging.
Yeah.
And, we can be doing all of the right things in terms of trying to get to know people and can feel really shut out. And what I found is that one reason or one explanation for that is that there wasn't an open market or marketplace for friendship. So when people are first coming to college or going to kindergarten or going to a high school, particularly where multiple middle schools are coming together, where there's new people, there's buyers and there's sellers, and there's a really active marketplace for friends in those settings.
I love that. And I think that is a comparison to creating college friends where there's an open marketplace for the first couple weeks or couple, months, and similar to going into certain grade schools or middle school and then again in high school. And then of course there's the secondary marketplace that you talked about. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In the New York Times piece, I talk about how shifts in identity can be a key to opening up a friendship market. So it's not just like we often hear the advice to, if you want to make friends, join a club. And joining a club can be helpful, but people also go to clubs and they don't make friends. And, part of that is not just joining a club, but joining a club where you're looking to deepen an aspect of your identity, and ideally where other people are too. So you don't just want to go and learn painting, for example, but you want to go and be a more creative person. It's kind of like a little slight shift, but it can be really important. And in order to be a marketplace, also, it's not just a one-time event, but that idea of propinquity comes in again too, where ideally it's something that meets regularly too. So you're encountering the same people again and again. You have opportunity to get to know each other better. And then you have to be willing to, not just be on your phone all the time, but to look up and talk to each other and perhaps take a risk with, inviting them to coffee or inviting them to take a walk or to do something else outside of that setting. And know that if they say no, it may not be about you. It may be that they're not in the market to make friends too.
I mean, that's such an interesting way of thinking about it. I've never thought about it that way, but I think it makes so much sense, and it's so applicable to, I think, people wanting to make friends, especially at different life stages. What about this area of place? Because of course, my focus has been on sort of like hometowns and or other places of belonging, and how those locations, but also the people within those locations, like a college campus. Can we talk a little bit about place attachment and place identity, and how that makes a difference for friendships?
Yeah, no, there were definitely both people uh, people whose hometown was important to them in a range of ways. And I think for college students, often they don't even realize that their hometown is part of who they are until they're not there too. And so there were, students that would connect with other people from, sometimes it was specifically their hometown, other times it's like their region that they're
Yeah.
from too, because the campuses I studied were both in the Northeast and New Hampshire. So people who are from California, for example, like that whole big state gets lumped together too as being an identity and a part of who they are. So, although they may go all the way across the country, they may find themselves being friends with people who share some aspect of like who they were, as that identity. So that can happen, in a range of ways. And then I saw hometown friends. Sometimes I had interviewed people about halfway through college and then as they graduate. And as I went through their list of friends the second time and asked them about, who was on the list the first time and who wasn't, it was interesting that for some people, hometown friends were on that list at both times. And then the first time I saw hometown friends be on their kind of second list, but not their first one, I was a little surprised about it. And then I wasn't so surprised about it because it became a common pattern that they'd said, well, they were still friends, but they weren't necessarily my closer friends. And they actually became closer, like the longer they were apart. So there's different, so it's not, I think we tend to think about making friends as being this, like either you're friends or you're not. It's this one-time thing, but really it's a process, and we become closer to people over time or farther apart as our identities change, as their identities change.
Definitely.
Sometimes being in the same city again together, whether it's your hometown or whether it's another place, brings you together.
Yep. And this sort of goes back to my other thought, like about your own hometown friend, specifically Sarah, that you talked about, and how that friendship might feel different in your network, so to speak. What distinguishes that, do you think? And is it special somehow?
It is very special in a lot of ways. And we both know each other, now for decades of our lives. We know who each other were in high school. We're similar in a lot of ways to who we were, yet there are things that we can relate to or about our families. Like she knows my family in a different way, my family of origin, than any of my other friends do. And I also, know her family in that way, which is something that, feels really special in that connection.
Yeah, I was thinking that might be actually a distinguishing factor for hometown friends and other friends throughout our lives, is that been exposed to our families, which is there's a different element and ingredient to the kinds of friendships that we have than often our college friends might not actually know those families unless we're local in some way. And good friends have the same ingredients, right? That they have the homophily aspect, they have the propinquity aspect, of course, and then they also have like this reciprocal part of it, right? And this trust and this feeling like we belong with each other.
We haven't talked about reciprocity either, which is an important part of friendship. Friendship is a chosen relationship, unlike many others. We were just talking about family. You don't usually choose your family or your coworkers. And, although structure plays a role in who your friendships are, as we've been talking about, there's still a lot of choice, involved in that process. So part of it is choice in who we label as a friend. And the second thing is reciprocity. And friendships don't have to be 50-50 like at any given moment too. And so I think about my friendship with Sarah, differently, in that there are times in my life where I have more to give to her, and there are times in her life when she has more to give to me too. And yeah, and that feels different over both long-term friendships, and I think there's something about the hometown part that matters there too.
Yeah, I think reciprocity is so important in maintaining friendships, because over time it has to feel like that we're both giving to this friendship, that it matters to both people. Maybe we can move on to this idea of losing friends and what you found in your chapter there around losing friends and how that might apply to college friendships and hometown friendships, of course.
Losing friends is a really natural process, and it's something that has a lot of stigma. I think people often don't want to, like, we don't want to lose friends, and we don't want to talk about other people not wanting to be our friend too. I think that's where a lot of the stigma comes from too. But what I found, well, a few things. One is that losing friends opens up time for you to spend with other friends too, because we all have, a certain amount of time in our lives. And there were definitely people who were, kept trying to kind of cling on to a friendship, not wanting it to end. And then they would often talk about, once they let that friendship go, someone else came into their lives and they didn't recognize that they then had that space.
That makes so much sense. So we do need space for other people, and without certain people, we'll hopefully fill it with others. But of course, we are in a time of people suffering from disconnection and loneliness and feeling that they don't have enough. And one of the things that I really wanted to encourage people to do from a hometown friend perspective is like have gratitude for the people that did have friendships with us, even if we have lost them through fading, or even if there was an actual, breakup, that the people that invited us over to their homes or played with us on the playground or picked us for kickball, they mean something to our sense of self, and that we can actually look back in some ways and have gratitude for these small friendships, even if they're not current friendships. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really lovely way to put it, for having gratitude for what someone meant, at some point in our lives in the past. And it doesn't necessarily mean trying to revive that friendship, because they might have changed, we might have changed, the distance between us might just be too hard, yet we can still have gratitude for what they meant. For us at the time, again, not to say that it can't rekindle also. So I also found there's that importance of having, gratitude for, I'd heard that phrase of friendships for a season, right? For a season in your life or for a reason. So it may just be one particular thing that we connect with a friend on, rather than expecting them to fulfill all of our needs, which I think is sometimes what we get, especially out of best friends or close friends. We think they need to be everything, and then we can be disappointed when that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that leads to the losing friends. Losing friends or not being chosen by a friend can really hurt. So it's important to recognize that, that sense of hurt, along with the sense of shame, and also to say that our friendships change a lot throughout our lives. So recognizing that, that they will change it, some, I didn't see this broken down by hometown friends versus not, but I saw that 7 years is like kind of an average time for a friendship to last.
Wow.
In terms of closer friends. So that means that like about 30% of our closest friends remain, like, as people are doing research with people over time. So there's both change and continuity in that. And right, if you don't have close friends or the kind of friends you want right now, it's never too late to start, and it's never too late to try, which is one of those more like uplifting things about that change aspect of friendship.
I agree with that. And I also think that that's a great opportunity for our both of our studies is that you can think about and have gratitude for the people that were in your lives. And often we don't make the effort to actually reach out to those people. And we do have opportunities through Facebook and Instagram and all these social media platforms to contact people. And I've heard a few people of in my hometown friend network have talked about reaching back to someone that they really had gratitude for and being able to find them and have these conversations with them. And one of my guests had, a 2-hour conversation with a fourth grade friend that they just had so much connection and just had lost track of each other, but they got a chance to reconnect in that way. And I think that's obviously what something could be done with a college friend too, to especially express that kind of gratitude, which could or could not launch us into a more connected version of that friendship at this point. Certainly doesn't have to, but I think that's a meaningful connection or a meaningful return to the reason why we had the friendship in the beginning. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that in general, and then any last thoughts about sort of being on this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think having that gratitude is really important, and reaching out could lead to a really fun rekindling. I also want to be careful not to set people up for bad expectations
Yeah,
too, because you can get a lot of gratitude just out of thinking about that
love
other
it.
person.
Agreed.
And there might be other reasons why they're not able to reach out at a particular time. So it doesn't necessarily have to be uh, received in the way that you intend it for it to be meaningful to you in your life. And one thing that I've seen among people who have really meaningful friendships in my studies, and a positive change I've taken in my own life, is to really prioritize friendships, and to not, for a long time, I let friendships kind of fill the cracks in my adult life, too. And now thinking about it as something that I want to make sure takes up more than just the cracks of like extra time. And whether that's, connecting with a hometown friend, or connecting with a best friend, or making sure to take a walk with a friend so I get both exercise and a good conversation too, is something that I've seen as really a really useful way to build meaningful friendships.
And I think it really tracks the research that we're seeing right now through sort of the good life and Waldinger's work and regarding how important relationships are to the human experience, and how when we're on our deathbeds, we're not going to think about all the achievements that we should have made, but we are going to think about the people that we kept in touch with and loved, and what that felt like throughout our lives. So I think that is what makes wellness and well-being in general, is these relationships. And to your point, not taking them for granted is such an important aspect of having well-being and overall. Well, thank you so much, Janice, for your time today, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak to another friendship nerd about these kinds of things and compare and contrast. Any last words about hometown friends and college friends, and any or this conversation in general?
Yeah, it's been fun to talk with you. This has led me to think more about hometown friends. And as I'm continuing to interview the participants in my study, to ask them not only about how they may stay connected with college friends, but how they may stay connected to hometown friends, and the impact those have on on our lives more generally, the support we have, keeping us healthy and connected. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hometown Friends. Dr. McCabe's research on friendship is so important for our understanding of these types of social relationships, and reading her books and articles has taught me so much about making, keeping, and losing friends. Her personal story of losing a friend to suicide and her story about collaborating with a group of women in her capstone project so clearly connects her personal journey to her professional life. One of the most interesting parts of this interview and of her research is the concept of marketplaces being applied to making friends. The image of a marketplace is one of an open space where people voluntarily come together to both sell and purchase items or services. Although this is most often an economic definition, Dr. McCabe's research seeks to apply this to how open people are to making meaningful relationships. And we see that there are predictable times in life when friendship markets are wide open. As children enter elementary school, middle school, and high school, as well as when young adults attend college, the first few weeks or months of these experiences are open marketplaces for making friends. The most meaningful friendships are often formed when people are in the midst of creating new and important identities for themselves. This is why hometown friendships and college friendships are often the most long-standing social relationships outside of the family. Other developmental periods, like becoming a parent or having elementary school-aged children, is often when parents find other friendships with other parents and build community through involvement with the school and with parents of the children of their own children's friends. These parents find open marketplaces for friendships and often form very meaningful social connections. The flip side of this is that working parents often have more difficult time building this type of community and can feel less connected to the school community. The friends that are made in these various developmental periods are often the friends that we keep and rely on for years. But if we lose them through attrition, lack of time or effort, or we have conflict with them, or we decide that these friends are not good for us, we can often find ourselves feeling lonely and more isolated than we want later in life. This is where Dr. McCabe's research on secondary friendship marketplaces is important, as it points out that we can make new friends throughout the life cycle, and yet we still have to consider the ingredients necessary to find others who are open to this. If we want to make new friends later in life, we need to find groups, meetups, or activities where we will find people in similar life stages or those who have similar identities. One of my hypotheses, and that I hope will allow people to find more meaningful relationships, is that having a strong hometown attachment and identity can bring people together and act as an on-ramp to social connection. In my experience, people who strongly identify with being from Berkeley or even the larger Bay Area easily connect and have effortless conversations about common social and political views, stories of growing up in diverse and vibrant communities where the various cultures, food, and good weather and the landscape was shared. Another hypothesis that I have is that reconnecting with hometown friends, especially when we might be looking for more social connection, is a valid and effective way to have more meaningful relationships. If you live close to where you grew up, or you have maintained hometown friends over the years, this can be easier. But even if you don't, reconnecting and keeping in touch is more available than ever. Using the marketplace analysis is important to consider when doing this because we need to choose those who we reconnect with and ask if they're open to it. Of course, this is risky and we don't always know and it's hard to predict. I have personally been doing this on this podcast, and I have found that most people are very open to these attempts, but others were not. Although I was hurt by these rebuffs, I took this as a learning experience, and I understood that losing friends is a natural part of life. Having gratitude for the past friendships, even if they're not open to reconnection, was my way of savoring the times we had together. This helps me build psychological resources and accept that we have different friendships for different seasons. Have you ever tried to reconnect with a friend or someone from the past? If so, what was your experience? Let us know by leaving a comment or sending us an email listed in the show notes. And if you like this episode, please do leave us a comment, like and subscribe and share with others, and give us a 5-star rating. Stay tuned and stay connected.
We fall down,